Hi, everybody. This is
Hi.
our first podcast. We are diving in. We are terrible amateurs, of course, in this. So if we look funny, this is the only way we can do it at the moment. But this is what we're doing. We wanted to connect with you. That is the podcast idea. And I hope you're getting a lot out of it because we have some things planned, of course. This is Foster. Say hi, Foster.
Hi, everybody.
And my coffee, of course. I don't function any other way. And this is our first episode. In our first episode, we want to talk with you a little bit about our perspective of, we call it spirit talk, of course. You know, I think when you're a spiritual person, spirit talk is normal. I mean, for me, I talk to more dead people than living people. And sometimes I don't know who's in the house, actually. They're alive or not, you know. But in shamanism, Foster, I think spirit talk is a fundamental skill that you need to train in order to do any kind of healing or any kind of leadership, because shamans are leaders in their tribes, of course. So the idea of let's call it in a simple form, spirit talk, is in my tradition, of course, or in my background, it is it's been taken very serious because information comes from spirit, and hopefully the information can be validated. Give us your perspective about shamanism and spirit talk and the skill that is needed, the training that is needed to separate the reality of the voice of your head to the voice of your higher dimension.
Well, when I first started sitting in nature, I started as a kid, and I would imagine my body opening to light. First of all, I concentrated on the sun. That's how I began. And you pour the sun into you, and it fills all your body, and you imagine doors opening in your body. And each door that opens, later on, I learned it was chakras, but each door that opens, when you get to the back of your neck, you open the door at the back of your neck, behind your neck. You open the door of the pineal gland, which I learned.
These are all very specific skill points, of course. You see, it's interesting that you say sunlight, because in Hermetic healing, in the Hermetic practice, the very first thing you have to be able to control is biodynamic light, we would call it, which is to fundamentally fill your physical and various bodies with light. So it's interesting when you say that the sun plays a fundamental role here as a giver of enlightenment, of course, you know?
And even moonlight too, but that's a different practice. And then when I get to my third eye or whatever up here, this door, once I can get up here, once I can get past my throat, opening it back here, and one of the things I learned to connect to spirit is really not to have any fears. I had to face all my fears, not before I connect to spirit, but to maintain the connection.
Do you think, Foster, when you, in your practice, in your tradition, when you open up to that, is spirit talk or spirit communication an automatic result? Is it something that happens automatic? And is it necessary? Or what if it doesn't happen?
Well, that's why I was taught you really should open up here and then make a 90-degree angle and go up through the top of your head. I mean, as far up as you can, that there's something always above your head that you connect to, whether it's a sun or it's a being above you or even higher. Because when I first had a huge awakening in New York, I was 25 years old. And what happened is my whole body became like a radio set. And I started to actually hear frequencies in my ears. I saw, 3 beings that were just blobs of light in front of my bed. And like a radio set, I could tune into them. I could actually tune the set. So, and I could feel like almost an apparatus going on top of my head, almost like a whole, I don't know how to describe this, like a metaphysical system that was anchored into me, with crystals put into my body overnight, with tools put into my body overnight.
Look, but you are already made for, your design is made for it. You see what I mean? You describe it very easy. Now, when somebody listens to us now, We have how many thousands of students and more thousands we work with globally, right? We travel a lot. Where, the people, I think, referring back to what you said, I think when people start a spiritual practice in any shape or form, what we often see and hear is that they want the practice, they go in, and at the first blip of some form of outer communication or insight or outer, they just shut down. They just shut down.
Well, I mean, I used to feel a presence that came even when I was a kid. I've had it all my life. And when it comes, you have a warmth in your body. The magicians, I guess, call it the holy guardian angel. I was taught that it's, your future self, but I was also taught that this is a higher being that is connected to you, that watches over your life. And when it connects to you, you feel a warmth inside of you.
Right.
And then I know I have a very good feeling, and then I know I'm connected and I can communicate with that being. Not, I want. It is a feeling of, I know.
The question is really, and that's what I've been asked a lot over the last couple of years, what is the benefit of spirit communication, interdimensional communication? And I think you're pointing to something important, because I learned very, very early to abandon the ideas of angels, demons, gods, these fragmented views of intelligence. We used to call them principles. Right. That's how I learned to address them. And that these principles will always kind of copy, if you want, your character. And that means if you're moody, then you're going to have moody, tainted spirit, you see. I think that's important, because I think a lot of people who come into spirituality, especially in the magical practice, the hermetic practice, I don't know about shamanism, but they really come with a mess. It's very, very often their life is messy, and they come into magic thinking that if I connect with some higher spirit, that higher connection, that spirit connectivity will fix my physical life. And it's exactly the opposite, because I remember when I was in one, super young, of course, and I was in these in a mystery school, or in the setting of a mystery school, and I was always amazed how little people they would let in, actually, or participate. And I was very young in the exception, because I already was born a certain way, so I didn't need to train certain basics in that sense. But it was really surprising, because they said, Kristos, when you see these people, a mess in their life, we interview them about their life. If they work regular, if they pay their bills, if they have any debts, if they're nice to people who they're helping. So the question or the interview, in order to participate in a mystery school, beside like in shamanism, remember when people say, how long does it take to become a shaman? And you say 10 years, and they're like, a book and a course should be enough, and over the weekend we're going to be shaman suddenly. But that school was fundamentally awakening for me, because it said, if you have no discipline and no will to discipline your physical life, you're going to bring a mess to the school.
Absolutely.
That's why, how many mystery schools do you think exist in the world? None, really none, you see. And what is called mystery schools now is a joke. And I don't judge it, but it is very, very different from where I came from. And the connection was that you cannot go anywhere until you control light, fire, light, energy, call it whatever you want. You see, we call it biodynamic light. You call it the light of the sun. But it is interesting that we both come from very different paths of the awakening paths, right? And yet light is a fundamental tool and a substance that I think that's what meditation does. And that's what yoga does, for example, right? And that's why we always say to people when they come, and we see, right, when they say we're teaching, and I'm like, so how's your practice? I mean, these are people who teach, and they, share themselves out there. And for sure, they're great in what they do. But it's so interesting, isn't it, that we hear how often they're fundamentally unhappy with their own practice, if at all. And I wonder, how can you be a providing, nurturing teacher or a healer if you don't have a non-stop, can I say non-stop? It sounds harsh, but a really deep-rooted connection to light, and through light to a higher intelligence, isn't it?
Absolutely. When people first come to me, like when they're just beginning, I always say to them, connect to the creator in your own heart.
Right.
Who's the creator in your heart? And you create, first of all, above and below a connection. It's never just above. It's also to Pachamama or Mother Earth or below you. So you need both connections. Because what is beneath us, the cities that live underneath the earth, the world that lives underneath us, and we talk about the chthonic world. What kind of spirits are you talking about? A lot of times in my life, everybody was always talking about spirits above, but there's so many other kinds of spirits. There's dead people, certainly those spirits. There are wrathful dead people, people who have been ghosts for too long that are now angry. Then there's the positive ghosts that want to help you, like also ancestors. And then you have those spirits that are below you, chthonic spirits, and there's so many of them. I mean, there's nature spirits, and then we can keep going to the spirits that live, below us on the earth.
Yeah.
And then we can go very high. I mean, we can go through many dimensions if you want to go to, interplanetary spirits.
Yes. You see, when I saw you the first time working, the very first time, I think the biggest surprise was, and it was a healing group in Amsterdam. I remember this very vividly. It was with Nina as a translator and organizer, which we still love very much. You can't stop loving her. But I remember she was the first person I met in your work, and we just had dated basically. And I came to Amsterdam and I saw you, and I think what was surprising is that everything you did in that moment, and people who know you, how you work, and it looks wild, of course, but what happened is that this huge amount of light accumulated outside of you. That means, it was so interesting, you were not part of the healing. In other words, how can I describe this to you? But I always say that you are creating a vacuum almost of light around the person, which motivates the spirit, the soul, if you want to call it, but I call it the spirit, to reach out for its own healing. You see, and that's why. And people say, "How do you do that? How do you work so many years?" I mean, you're like in your what? Are you in your 40th year now? Easy, yes. But easy. But they say, "How does he do that?"
It started when I was 10 years old. So.
Exactly. But you see, in the end, I think that real healing is not through you.
No,
it comes also, through you. You see, which is important, which is also the difference. I remember because the person we were working on was a mess, and it's a person who likes being a mess. You know what I mean? So there's also that kind of character. But what was interesting is that you didn't stop pouring in the positive element into that light vacuum. See, so I think the true healing from a shamanic perspective, of course, because it's the mother of all spirituality, but any kind of healing, it doesn't matter who you are, a healer, a doctor, a nurse, a witch, I don't care. If you don't believe that the person can be helped, that the person you're trying to help can get better, if you can't visualize it and feel it, it doesn't matter how good you are, you will not move their light. You see what I mean? And I remember that's what you did. And I thought, this is the first time, and I saw somebody shifting the primary colors of the aura. There's two dimensions. There's a secondary, which is the everyday stuff. We go from red to blue to green to with our moods, right? It's like these cheap rings that you can buy. These are mood rings that God knows what they're responding to, but that's what the secondary aura is. But to change or to let me say the word, to shift the primary aura, that only works through maturity, through practice. So there are people who have the same color combination all their life. All their life, you see. It's interesting. So when you started working, and I thought, how the hell does he do that? It was a shift within half an hour, 45 minutes. I remember you worked a long time on these people each. And they got up and literally their skin texture changed. You see?
You clear all the pattern, yes.
Right. So you see, it was an amazing experience because this is, for me, real shamanism, but also you went through your training, you went through, you see, and you never stopped training because you're working with it every single day. Isn't it? Absolutely. I think that is fundamentally important because, you know, there's a million books right out there about how to become a shaman in a week. It's like lose your weight in 10 days. Use that cream, you're going to look younger in 2 months. You know, we want to believe that stuff, but I think in spirituality, especially dynamic spirituality, active systems, it can backfire really badly if the person is not trained or introduced to something correctly. Therefore, I don't know in shamanism what the requirements are to become a shaman, but I remember when I tried to find my rabbi, for example, and I was like 12, and I was banging at that door, and you know, they don't let you in, right? They close the door on you 3 times to see if you really mean it. But I mean, I knocked on that door like 5 times, basically. I said, I'm not moving, you see. So I forced myself into somebody's life and I said, you have to teach me, you know, that's what my purpose was. I knew that already. Well, and it's an immersion, isn't it, in the end? So, but the requirement, I think, is not for everybody. The level of dedication, because you're going to agree with me, once you're in, you can't get out. There is no way back from a commitment that you make. You know what I mean? And people who did it, we had a couple of people freaked out for whatever reason, and they just stopped everything. I tell you, they all are like meteorites falling into a crater, you know.
Well, you know, Kristos, when I was 9 or 10 years old, I started in churches. Remember, I only could read the Bible. My parents wouldn't let me read any spiritual books.
Right.
So I had to get it from within myself. So I used to sit in a meadow and I used to connect to nature. You know, and you imagine that Christ is coming to talk to you. You imagine, you know, all of nature, that the creator comes down and you're everywhere in the creator, the whole, all of nature, everything is the creator. And you would get a download, you would get insights into what you were reading and whatever you were doing, because my parents wouldn't let me have any other book.
Right.
So I started out in this Christian kind of environment. You know, Pentecostals, born again Christians, all these things, which was not my family. They were Catholic. But at that time, there was a Catholic charismatic movement. So, you know, I used to go to church and I could feel everything. I was always emotional. So I would cry. I would feel what everything meant, even in a mass and everything. But people started to think, you know, they would make me lay hands on people. That's how I learned how to lay hands. And that's how it really started. So they would bring people one after another and I would lay hands on them. And then sometimes it was hundreds of people in one setting in a church. And I was only 11. And they started to say, you know, you're a prophet. That's when it started. People called me a prophet, or they called me, you know, a healer. And basically churches made money off of me because everybody was coming to these churches only when I came and only when I was doing the healing work. And then later on, you know, we would visit. I started by just visiting churches, whatever. And then later it grew into something else. And I had to keep it secret from my parents and all of that. But the light would just come in that moment. I would be completely overshadowed. And information would also be in that light. And I would just immediately translate it into word. I would use the word, you know, from like a logos. That's what people call it. And I would just translate that living word into something that they need to hear.
Look, what we're describing here for people is, of course, something that, again, if you believe in destiny, I think that we've been put into destiny to do that very early on. I mean, I don't know what it's like not to see something, you know, in that sense. Since I remember seeing consciously, I've seen always more than 2 people in the room, and there was, you know, somebody else. So the in-between, as Castaneda calls it, the world beyond, right? I think he calls it, or the invisible dimension. Yeah. I think that when you're being put into a dimension like this, it's easier. I think it's easier to access this. Now, when somebody says, I didn't have this, where do they start? Where do they start? First of all, I don't know if you're going to agree with me. I think a lot goes into understanding the level of dedication you need to offer to yourself, because a spiritual path is self-care.
Yes.
It's self-care,
And Kristos, you are a knowledge person. Your main focus is knowledge. So It doesn't matter if a person is good or bad or whatever. It's just pure knowledge, it's their intelligence.
Is the knowledge worth it to transmit it to somebody, to explain it, when there is no practice? See what I mean? I can bring a bottle of champagne to the party, but if there's no glasses, we're all going to share from the bottle and get herpes, basically. You know what I mean?
My shamanic practice, though, remember, Kristos, was only discipline. It was very harsh.
That's what I mean. I think that's the level of dedication.
They put ropes on me. They threw me off cliffs. They tried to build my willpower.
Let me ask you, were you prepared for that? Did you know that this would happen?
No, not at all. I had no idea.
When it started happening, right? And there were certain directives that said, okay, we want you to jump, we want you to drown, we want you to bury yourself.
They did all that, yes.
You told me, and you wrote about this in your books, right? When
naked in the snow, yes.
You wrote about it, and you shared a lot about this in your TV specials. The question is, which I'm sure is happening also to people because we hear it, they go very excited to some retreats or a workshop or something that God knows is over-promising. Very often it's over-promising, in 10 days for 10,000, I'll make you psychic, I make you a channel.
Well,
right? We've been through this. But again, the thing is, if you had known, or while you were going through this process, did you ever think, that's all crap? They don't even know what they're doing. They're making it up half of the day. No. What was it that distinguished for you this group? And when you realized this, I'm going through a real practice here. What was
it's a feeling. You have a feeling that it's true, and you see results, and you see yourself transforming.
Well, most results is the key.
Tremendous results.
You see, for me, from a magical point, from an occult point, right, and a spiritual point, metaphysical point, call it whatever you want, I'm not interested in spiritual experiences. I'm very much interested in metaphysical or transformative experiences, because we are on this planet to be able to remember. Some say we need to learn, but I think we need to remember that we can manipulate energy.
Yes.
Isn't it? So it's in this interesting perspective, because I know the story, we talked about it many times. I think you and me both went one way or another. The same was for me when my teachers showed up. It was for me, in retrospect, I was almost like, somebody, it's like the van that stops beside the street and the stranger offers you candy. You say, sure, I go in and get the candy and they close the door. That's how it felt, of course, with a good outcome. But it was the level of absolute naivete, but also the idea of, there was something that, in my case, it was almost like, it reminded me of something, There was a memory that came through. I thought, I'm supposed to do this somehow. When you say it was a feeling, but what was important for me that I learned very early is the practice, the inner practice is only a tool for the outer practice. And it is to manipulate the physical and the metaphysical, basically. And that was
in the early days, a lot of those practices were breathing practices to create prana.
Right.
In the very early days, you had to wake up very early in the morning because you needed, the dawn. So that I also, for my first 12 years studying shamanism, no television, no outside influences.
Right.
I still worked and did things, because I was an apprentice. One of the big things that always happened is following my not only the spirits, that the ones that finally found me, they choose you.
Mm.
So when the healing lady came, when she first came and she started showing me, that she was always going to be there when I'm doing healing work.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I know that they're called saints or whatever, but these saints came, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if they're saints. They may have been much older beings.
Right.
St. Nicholas and this lady, whoever she was, she has many, many names. She has many breasts, also. And she came and she also has been a saint. So they come in different forms. But they say, this is not my form. And then you have, my protector. We always have a protector spirit. And then there's the elf. I always have an elf near me. I'm a shaman. And the elf introduced himself to me first, with the two different colored eyes. And I have other spirits. There's quite a few here. Sometimes, like when you're working, you have thousands of advisors.
I mean, I'm putting into
I have healing masters. Yeah, I have healing spirits. Sometimes I have a Chinese guy. Yes.
I think you're saying something important when it comes to spirit talk. I think, and that's what I learned too. And that was a rule that was given to me before I even opened a page. You never address the spirit first.
Yes, they
that
came.
Was especially in the practice of astral travel. Now, meditating is not astral travel, and zooming off is not astral travel, and thinking that I project myself from here to Paris is not astral travel. It's a very dangerous at times, but it's an amazing experience, which is like going to the gym and working out. But once you do that and you go into the dimensional experiences, and this was hammered into my head, you do not address a spirit. You don't go to the spirit world and say, where am I? That was the funny thing, because then that entity, no matter who it is, would say, well, this is somebody beneath me. You see, you have to show authority where you go, not be mean. You don't show up as a Nazi, basically, but you have to show authority. And when they come, and when I think spirit comes to you and chooses you and addresses you, I think that is the essence of spirit talk, spirit communication. Again, I learned, and I know in shamanism there is no such thing as angels and demons, right? That doesn't really exist, that terminology.
But they often give you their names, they have names, they talk to you.
Names, titles, or, my guide said at some point, well, just call me this and it's fine. You can call me Humpty Dumpty, I don't care. But it was interesting. It was interesting that when I was a kid, the first real communication was with my guide, who's standing in the middle of my room in the middle of the night and says, I'm here to guide you, and of course, I jumped out of my bed and ran I ran around the block. I was terrified, that's how real it was. And it was real because it happened in my dimensional experience, you see. And after that, it became a much more it's interesting because my guide says, figure things out for yourself. You know the tools, so you have no reason to ask me stuff. And I realized also, and you know that too, like a surgeon who can't do surgery on himself, once you go into that path, or any path for that matter, a metaphysical path, you rarely are able to help yourself. It's a complete part of trust on the metaphysical, because unless you're schizophrenic, you can't be objective with yourself, right? And
no fear, Kristos. You have to overcome every fear, because that's the obstacles on this path. That's what the Egyptians were trying to do, make you face every single fear in order to go through a higher initiation. Right. Same thing that I went through. I had to face every fear, which was mostly heights for me. They were always putting me on the top of a mountain. They were always putting me in places where I was dangling on the edge, until I finally breathed and says, I fell off a cliff and they grabbed me, things like that. Right. And that's trust, because I had to trust them. But it's one way of trust. Yes. Because for other people,
getting off the comfort level is, it's not cursing, or it's not, skipping a kind act, for example. It's a much non-dangerous practice, but I hear you in this concept.
Well, leaping off of these huge cliffs, or they used to make me constantly fall backward over cliffs, and they had like a parachute underneath. I was terrified.
I did my bungee jumping. I did my bungee jumping, and I did my parachute. I can't tell you that it made me more courageous. You know what I mean?
Trust. I had the courage. Even now when I'm on a cliff, I remember all those things. It comes streaming through me. Right. And instead of fear, I know that I'm going to go through it, or I don't. I don't know that you have to keep repeating the same things over and over again.
So what are the criteria you would say if somebody, and we said this now quite a bit, how many people will start to awaken more and more? Everybody's wondering when the change will happen, and I said, guys, the change happened already. We are just now in a pull and tuck of war, basically. But change always wins in the end. Movement, evolution always will happen. And I think we are at the brink at the moment of a renaissance in spirituality. I just don't think that, and that's personally what I do, is that I think that I can go back to some ancient book, dust it off and say, let's apply it here. Just because it had value 5,000 years ago, it doesn't necessarily translate to the consciousness we have right now at this planet. We believe both in and experience dimensional shifts. We experience both time shifts, right? Many people we know did this, and we know that it's happening, so we know how to respond to it. But somebody who thinks, I left my keys now here and finds them somewhere else, that either I'm getting Alzheimer or I'm losing my mind. And that's what they used to call magic, or they used to call evocation, or in worst case, the devil, right? Another
finding portals and going through portals
and gates. But in the end of the day, it is dimensional shifts that happen whenever. I think a shift always happens when we're lingering too long in an experience that doesn't serve us anymore, because I feel like when we're just hanging around and we do not the same over and over, I think at some point you're getting into a dimensional amnesia. You're going through some kind of a gate or an energy that says, okay, let's reset here, because what you're doing is crap, basically, right?
But it happened so fast, Kristos. Like that experience when we were driving. I was driving with Myrtala Bentov, this physicist's wife, Ben Bentov, and we were in a car listening to an experience of a man bilocating. There was an experiment that her husband had done, and this man bilocated into a, from one area into a elevator. And as I'm listening to it, our whole car in one split second was on the other side of the road,
right,
on a highway going full speed. And it happens in the blink of an eye. And all of a sudden you've dimensionally shifted to another place. We bilocated as we're listening to it.
Right.
And you've done that. I've seen you, be in one room and then you bilocate to another room. Mm-hmm. That's possible. And we know other teachers have done that from Daskos onward.
I think as long as we live in this gravitational reality where these physical laws apply, you can bend the laws, you can bend energy.
Like, even when I was a shaman and I was in New Hope, Pennsylvania, I was in somebody's home, helping these people and, giving them whatever, guidance at that time. And he didn't believe in anything, the owner of the house. He always wanted to see extraterrestrials. That was his thing. I want to see a spaceship. So that in those days, I never had any doubt, ever. So we just walked outside and say, okay, I'll call you a spaceship. And I called a spaceship and it came right next to us. And then it zoomed off 2 seconds. The whole thing lasted maybe 5 seconds. But it had such a huge impact on him. Now I believe. I mean, he had a mandala carved into the side of his mountain. I mean, he was definitely a spiritual being, a person. quite, in his path, but he needed some sort of proof. And I've seen you do proof as well, like when you manifested objects, when you manifested, smells and perfumes and things in your own magic.
But that is, again, I have to say, non-believers are the best because they are so open to see something. They're coming from such a 0 point that everything that happens is just a success level. You know what I mean? Because something will happen.
Well, I hope later you do show a little bit about how, I lost some objects in my life, that were very sacred objects to me. Right. When I was in Rome, something fell off my neck, right. And right. you put some sandalwood paste together, and from the sandalwood paste, the object emerged. Mm-hmm. So you bilocated an object for me that I had lost so that I could still wear it, and I still wear it to this day.
I want to point out, as fantastic as this sounds, it is a
science.
It is a science, absolutely. There's a practice to it, but also it costs a lot of energy to do this. See, and this is where we have to accept that our bodies will age, and we are not capable unless you practice. I always tell you, I'm waiting for my ability to decrease because that would make sense. I'm in my 50s, and it gets worse, actually. It's almost intensified because of the different stages of dimensions that I'm exploring right now. And I think it just does something to you. The sheer fact that you're practicing something every day makes you spiritual. It's like writing, I always say when a writer says, I'm a writer, and then I ask them how often do they write? They say, well, whenever the blue moon shines. I'm like, you're not a writer unless you're writing every single day. It doesn't matter what you do. You're not a writer. If you don't do any art, you're not an artist. If you're not singing every day, you're not a singer. If you don't practice something, if you don't get distracted. Very simple, you see. And people say, what do you expect me to do? Write every day? Yes, even if it's one sentence, at least the continuity is more important than the amount to put in. And the same thing applies to any practice, you see, because you see, I don't call traditions anymore. I call them currents. A tradition, it's almost like you have to refer to this, and if you don't do this, it refers to. So, I can't do. It's useless. But if you look at a tradition as a current, there is evolution already embedded in the whole idea, and that's what it is. A tradition will evolve, and then what is the evolution? It's a current.
See, well, there was a time when we did mostly ceremony. We did mostly rituals. I was doing that constantly, ceremonies, preparing for ceremonies. And the spirits would come, and they were very detailed ceremonies.
No.
And things have changed.
Because we're talking about a lot with people, and there's a lot of talk about the Earth will go to the fourth dimension.
Yes.
A fifth dimension, which I believe we will skip the fourth and go to the fifth. But what is the thing that makes the dimensional shift for a planet? And I contemplate this, and I talked to my guide about it. I said, explain to me what recipe on a global scale happens for a planet to evolve. And my guide said, imagine that all the currents, call them traditions, but that all currents at some point, the current of witchcraft, the current of hermeticism, of shamanism, all these strings. That is how I understand string theory from a spiritual point. All these strings at some point come together, and they merge, and they, how do you say this in English? They, it's almost like macrame, you're intertwining them somehow. And when all these currents at some point that are in their own respective path, if they come together at some point, the amount, the impact of that light, we're back to the light, takes whatever it surrounds, which is the aura of the Earth, basically, in this case, the planet, and shifts it to the next dimensional experience. So I think that only spiritual awareness, let's call it spiritual awareness, because every awareness is spiritual, even if it has nothing to do with
It's a remembering. It's a remembering.
Absolutely. It comes together and we shift. And I'm telling you, there's a very interesting idea about how often do we shift consciously or dimensional jumping, basically. And that is an interesting thing because in spirit, they talk a lot about dimensional experiences, how easy it is for them to go from one dimension to the next, because time is an illusion, right?
I know when you're doing it in a ritual, there's a point in the ritual where you're invisible,
right,
where you've gone into fourth dimension and nobody can see you. That's
right.
something physically everybody says, okay, Kristos not here now. He's already entered another dimension.
Right.
Like many other, magicians have done that.
But that can be here for 2 minutes.
But you see everybody. You're seeing everybody, but they don't.
Everybody, but I am for half an hour, in my experience, on a different viewpoint, so to speak. So I think that we are all. I think that a lot of the veteran spiritual teachers, I want to say the fundamental ones, the true ones, the dedicated ones, which are more than we can imagine, but they are. I think that they are the carriers of these currents, and with their practice, and that our tribe is bringing all the shifts together. And there's an interesting theory in all of this, which is that we already all died, and the planet got already destroyed. We're already shifted overnight to a different dimension, which is it's part of that whole metaphysical quantum theory idea, right? But
prevent it from happening again.
Well, the idea is really, the theory is quite interesting because it speaks of the Earth was hit by this huge meteor which erased basically the dinosaurs, right? And again, you want to tell me that in these billions of years, let's say, I make it up now, 3 billion years, never again we were hit by a meteor of that size, right? We were just lucky and they all flew by. Or we've been hit multiple times and always transfer to the next dimensional evolution. So see, that's why if you look at the last 120 years, right, how fast our technology,
everything,
so much faster, right? So speed, I think, in this sense, has to do a lot with these dimensional shifts, and they happen in seasons. There is a whole theory around it. We can talk about it in another time, but let's go back one more time to the idea of dedicating yourself to a self-nurturing, self-caring, self-centering practice. And let's not call it spiritual. Because even spirit, because how often do we see spiritual people and they are a mess, right? From the living conditions to the relationships, very often a mess. That's why we see so often, sexual stuff going on with teachers and students, and which is a huge no-no. But we see this a lot.
You require some integrity, to be in spirituality.
Absolutely.
It's an ethical system. And it's built in, no, it has to be built in, or it has to be learned.
It has to be learned. I think it has to be learned, because I think most people, when we work with their aftermath mess, when this happens, it's quite interesting when you see why this happens. How can somebody be, I don't want to name names now because it doesn't matter, but there was this big, important teacher, right? And the running joke was invite him to your dinner because he's a wonderful, dinner guest, but don't leave him alone with your daughter in the room.
Never.
You know what I mean? And we know the stories, know the stories more than anybody about all these gurus and all these people and the real background of it. lack of integrity, absolutely. I think that helping people at this point to understand that a spiritual practice will not make you better. Like all these Christians now and all these born again, all their prayers, unfortunately, hasn't made them better people. You see, because they need such a judgmental form of directive. Otherwise, they would be loose cannons. So they need to be almost controlled like dogs. You know what I mean? But that happens in all spiritual practices. It's really amazing. And the main reason to go spiritual is freedom, liberation, live and let live, no judgments. You see, as I said in my new Hermetic laws, if you, the homework basically for judging somebody is you have to live the judgment for 24 hours, get a taste of what you're judging. See, when you look at people and say, oh my God, look at these homeless people, you know, I mean, they look like trash. You have to go and live for 24 hours exactly like this. And that is what spiritual practice is. You know, you think you have a right to judge somebody, then go live it. Then go live it or shut up, right? That's the idea. But I think integrity, an inner moral compass, has to be examined before they even step in anything like this.
And it has to be lived for a certain period of time.
And that spirituality, any spiritual path is not a guarantee it will make you a better person. No. Or it will not do anything that you don't have already, but it's a refinement of your ability to serve yourself. You see, everything we learned in Christianity and especially in religion, organized religion, I want to say this because this was so important. We had a talk, right, in a session, and I said to my guide, I want to understand, why do some people win and make so much money and are really successful, or are just very happy, you know? And why some with the same qualifications don't win? Like when we look at Oscars, for example, or, you know, why would somebody, they're wonderful actors, these are great examples of creative work. Why would this person work or that director work and win and not the other one? And we would say, according to The Secret, we would say the one who imagines it a lot or wants it the most. And it's not true. My guide said, the person who's the most proud of what they created and who they are the winners. Basically, the idea of don't feel pride, pride is a cardinal sin, is actually a fundamental turning point in somebody's experience to be successful, to feel victorious in life. You know, you have to have a good sense of pride about what you created. And these days, you know that with all the social media, we are bombarded with, if you don't look a certain way, talk a certain way, make the money a certain way, do a certain way, especially the younger generation. I mean, I can't imagine being 20 now, you know, with all these bombardments, you lose a sense of pride in what you do. And I think that's what you do. And I have to say this not because, you know, we're married and I know you, but you've always been a very proud shaman. You know,
I've always loved what I do. I love it. You cannot do this kind of healing work without a love for humanity. You have to love.
This is something
your heart has have to have opened at some point.
Absolutely. And I think in this, I mean, you should do what you want to do. Absolutely. But I think that would be a very good takeaway here from this episode. You know, how to reach, what is the one ingredient that makes people into a winner, into a achiever, without the material idea. We don't talk about this, but to get to a point where they feel a sense of belonging and a right. My guide said, everybody's talking about your birthright, your cosmic birthright. And, you know, you can invoke it, but it can be behind glass and you'll never get a taste of it because you don't feel pride in what you have achieved so far. Isn't that interesting? You see, so I think that pride has to be looked at from a very different perspective here. It's not something negative.
Well, a mother has to put herself first because the children will copy her. Right. So she doesn't have pride in herself if she does not put herself first. If she's always, you know, deflecting to other people, then, that children will copy that, and you don't want that.
I say one of your most fundamental questions in sessions, especially to women, but it's not gender related. You know that we have enough men who are also idiotic in relationships, because they let everybody run over them. I mean, we've seen it.
Same thing. Yeah.
Absolutely. And you say something very important, which I think is a very fundamental question when people justify their relationships. They talk about, well, he's drinking less, or she's less obsessed with the neighbor or something. And you say, and you ask, is this how you want to be respected?
Yes.
And I've seen this in their face when you ask them this, and they look at themselves and say, I never thought about this. which again proves the point that I think everybody's an idiot in this world. Say it with a lot of love, but they're idiotic. But it is really amazing to see how people justify and talk themselves into reasonings, right? It's my karma to be with this man. It's my karma to endure this woman. No, it's not. It's a choice. Because, until the Indian gurus came, the word karma didn't even exist in the West. But, we had a different word for karma. It's called responsibility, right? Be responsible, get a common sense. But isn't it interesting that while people come to our sessions, individual and together, and they say, how can I get better in this relationship? And the relationship is broken. Let's make it extreme. We say, you can't fix it. You see, it's broken. You cannot love something unlovable. But you say very often, is this how you want to be respected? And I say, what is the one thing you are proud of? And it's fundamentally amazing, I have to say, how people sit there for 20 minutes, waste their time, basically say, I can't remember. That is actually also a good starting point for somebody. See, because if you can't remember that, and that's what we want to ask you guys who are listening, what are you proud of? And more important, are you proud of what you've put out there in your life without judging it as successful or not?
But Kristos, you also have a kind of humility, because even though you have pride, you have a humility underneath. There's certain limits that you will go with your pride.
Yes, absolutely.
And you should also talk about that. I know people need much more pride now because they've gone too much on the other side, have turned the other cheek, and humility and everything.
Yeah.
And then they get run over, and then they want the creator to always take care of them, protect them, in every way. And then they don't know how to earn money or whatever. But you have talked a lot about humility.
Yeah.
Because you have it inborn in you. You know when you're going too far. Do you want to say anything about that?
But also, just because it was there, it was not meant it would be lived. You know what I mean? It had to be educated into my system. And I learned from my teachers in that sense. You will be able to do great things. It means nothing. It means nothing. See? In other words, if people judge you negatively, it means nothing. And if people judge you positively, it means also nothing. I learned to immunize myself of outer opinions. In other words, and that's how I learned it very early. If you allow an outer opinion to become more important than the sense of pride you have, you're out. You're out of your alignment, you see.
But then again, when you're in the center of your circle, for me, it might be the medicine wheel. It could be, if I do magic, it would be a magical circle, whatever. You are, in essence, the creator. You are the image of God. For all the spirits that come, how you conduct the ritual, they will respond to you as a divine being.
Right.
And in the medicine wheel, it's more a balance with all of nature and everything, but you are divinity. You still are a divine being in that medicine wheel, in the center.
Yeah, absolutely.
And at all points.
But you see, the idea is also, and this is what I understood, and this is what I also want to correct a little bit. It's these fine-tuning elements, you see, because I know people who say in rituals, and it was also introduced to me, the idea of I want a change in my life. I want an achievement. and may it be for the best of everybody,
Right.
or
That's
to the best of all, right? What if, and I said, my guide said, you better stop this. Because if it's in the best of all for you to get sick, die, which is also not a drama, but or be homeless or get robbed or, you know, evaporate, you will not like that this is the best for all. He said, stop saying the best for all or the best for me. He always said, say the best for me or more from what I can comprehend right now, I want. But
or you say to spirits or gods or goddesses, whoever you want to talk to,
yeah.
I bless you and I bless myself.
Right.
I also bless them.
Exactly.
I didn't
Always
care.
nice. All I learned is be nice. We say in German, the way you call into the forest, that's the way it's going to call back to you. Or the sound makes the music. And I think
Absolutely,
it's really crucial. You know, when people say, I'm so afraid of rituals, and then, you know, that maybe ghosts will appear. But here you're in a ritual trying to invoke a spirit. Then the spirit knocks and says hello, and everybody's screaming and yelling and goes to the psychiatrist. What do you want? You know what I mean? But let me say something else, Foster, because I want to conclude this. I just had a wonderful session before with a friend of ours. And I don't know how we got to this point of conversation, but there was something interesting about, can you excuse humanity, or your own humanity, when you are too aware, too knowledgeable, too conscious, right? And, you know, she said, well, you know, I know a lot, I learned a lot, but, you know, I have my flaws, which is human nature. And her guide said, not for you. You cannot use the excuse, that's human nature, if you know how to go beyond human nature. And interesting enough, I think that human nature, in its nature, is primitive, instinctual, you see. Instinctual in that sense. It has 5 instincts, and then we're responding to it. And I think the nature of our human nature is primitive. So when we go into evolution, experience, even the people who will listen to this, you know, even if they don't know what they're listening to, or not, but there's no accidents. You know, everything is in resonance, of course. I think it's interesting that from a spiritual perspective and non-physical perspective, the term it's human nature is not applied to you because you know too much. You, especially now with our
choice,
what we teach is usually not amateur stuff. You know, it's on a very high level. Or the video series, I will link it in the description of the video, by the way, if you want to go and have a look at our video series.
Kristos, we are made in the image of the divine.
Right.
We are patterned after it. We have all the attributes of it, of our own creator.
Right.
And our whole purpose here is really to, first of all, overcome our fears and to, you know, now finally move to this next dimensional level together. And of course, to go to that dimensional level, you're saying we don't have to go through a blackening. We don't have to go through a period of pure chaos here on Earth, you know, to have that dimensional shift, because not everybody's ready for this. And a lot of people have guns and other things when you're making a dimensional shift, you know, and they're a little afraid. We also have this idea of, we had, you know, the creator made a creation here and made a tremendous kind of plan for it. And then we have a separate creator. We have an artificial virtual plan as well. And another being made of an artificial plan. And those 2 plans are also now meshed together. Because we are the other creator's plan as well. We've come here, you know, speeding up creation, whatever. And also going back to a point in time, you know, whatever you want to call it, a golden period or whatever, where we knew a lot of things, and this planet should have gone into another dimensional quality a long time ago. So we're also in that. We're in the next phase to do that, because it couldn't do it before.
Right.
And we can talk about that, what was here on Earth, the Mars colony, all that stuff.
Yeah.
A lot of things happen on Earth. There's a lot of history here.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think we have to talk about how these two different plans now have come together, two different, the great creator, and then the other one. Who wanted to change creation, who left it and created their own with their incredible intelligence.
Right.
And we're following the other one, actually, and now those two are coming together in our lifetime. This is why this is such a fulcrum, such an important, a lot of Native Americans I know, they're waiting for the great purification in which they have to go back to the tribes and they have to go into nature to get away from the chaos of the cities. And you are always saying to me, don't worry about that, because that's not how I see it. That's not what's going to happen. It's going to be a dimensional shift where, more in the twinkling of an eye.
Right.
Where we really enter it.
Right.
And, we've had a lot of experiences of that dimensional shift, because in our work, we do move dimensionally quite a bit. In shamanism, you're always moving that way. You're working with meteorites and you're working with various things in order to spirit travel.
Right.
To the void also. You always have to go through the void. That's another thing we have to discuss with people eventually. What is the role of the void in our lives, and how spiritually do we maneuver when we enter the void and when we pass through it?
Right.
That's going to be very important for their spiritual development, and to be able to sit in a void for quite a period. Shamanism, you have to spend time in the void.
Right.
You have to know it intimately.
Good.
And that, COVID is the beginning of that, I think.
Right. I think it forced it, wasn't it? Absolutely. Right. I think that was a very, very helpful resetting button. I think, it brought out the best and the worst. There's
unified.
There's nothing in between. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And not to have the fear,
right,
of a microbe or a virus that's
very important
in the future.
Get manipulated, isn't it?
Yes.
Because everybody had their own truth, of course. Unfortunately, my guide always said, all truths are true, which I thought were doomed, basically, if all truths are true. But in the end of the day, you see, I want to close this episode, Foster, with a reminder. And people say, what is the best protection these days from energies? And it's not just ghosts and spirits and, the ETs abducting us, which they don't, because there's no ETs. It's something else. Because I think the best protection is not to believe anything without proof. And so I want to close this with saying what I always say in my groups, especially, or in our teachings: research, read, find, discover. Don't just get the Reader's Digest of a teacher and just mix it together and drink from it. You have to make an effort. We have some students and some friends who want to teach Kabbalah, for example, and say, what's the easiest way or a good book? And I say, you have to read the Zohar. You have to immerse yourself in it. It's so easy to just copy something, and not copy only. I mean, I copied, but I am a dismantler. You see, I have Pluto in my first house, which means when I destroy you, to me, and you're destroyed, then I'll really think how I can atomize you. But at the same time, it means it's very hard for me just to take something and say, yeah, that's the word of God, and now I'm going to follow it, and I'm going to justify my nastiness with it.
Right.
I am a dismantler. I learned to dismantle scriptures, and I'm in the lucky position to read a lot of them and to understand a lot of them. But interesting enough, they also speak to me, by the way. You see, and that is more. I don't even try. They talk to me. They say, come now do that. So there's rarely a preparation, but it's interesting that I always say to people, you're losing your protection physically and spiritually when you start to let things in that are not real, that are not proven. I'm open. I'm really open, during COVID.
You're opening the idea of phantoms, Kristos. You're opening the idea of people creating thought forms
which we will talk about in a different episode.
Terrorize them. A lot of people that they're trying to protect themselves from their own thought forms and fears that they now gave a lot of energy too, and has independent existence.
Absolutely. And I think it's really important for people to understand, do your research, read, question it. Even, and I know I'm mostly right in what I do, because I'm an examiner. I dismantle and I examine things. Things have to make sense, because if they don't make sense, they're not true. You see, it doesn't matter how grandiose they sound. If something says, I'll make you thin in 20 days, not real. If somebody says, I'll make you a psychic in 20 days, or but it's not real. It is impossible, because it's like becoming a witch. People say, I want to be a witch. You can't become a witch. Either you are or you're not, you see. And if you are, you're not going to ask it. You're going to immerse yourself.
Yes, you can remember.
The current calls you. You see, everybody wants to be a shaman that you know, but they're not making it, because the current of shamanism, the current doesn't call them. And I think that is also the idea of calling and responding to a call, right? But we're going to talk about this in a different episode. I think it's interesting, right? Are we good, Foster?
Yes,
I think we're going to.
Yes.
Guys, wherever you are, I hope you have a wonderful day or night or evening. You know, vampires, of course, are an exception. You know, you don't need sleep. Bless your heart. And we see you in our next episode, which we will hopefully be able to produce in a weekly or bi-weekly rhythm. Bear with us. We're going to be on tour again, and have a couple of changes going on. But this is our beginning, and that's our dialogue, and that's what we're doing. And we hope you love it, and you're going to feel inspired and motivated, and many, many blessings from me.
And me.
And we see you again until we see you again. Okay. Bye, guys.
Bye.